Truth and reconciliation, re-education, deprogramming. These words are getting thrown around in mainstream media quite a bit these days and over the past several months. We now have a new release from Project Veritas showing Vijaya Gadde and Jack Dorsey, the people I was on the Joe Rogan podcast with, talking about censorship ramping up. There's going to be a lot more. And we know exactly where this is going. They say conspiracy theories. That's what they're going to go after. Are they going after leftist conspiracy theories, though? No, of course not. It's only the right. So we can rest assured that Jack Dorsey's unhinged view of the world will become the dominant worldview on Twitter, which will be the guiding factor of journalism and then Democratic politicians. The good news, I guess, is that with the censorship of conservatives, they won't be exposed to the absurdity of their conspiracy worldview, I guess. I don't think it matters. I don't think censorship works, and we've seen it throughout history just not working. But aside from the Project Veritas release, the big story we have, they're both pretty big stories. We'll go through them. CNN segment. They on this segment, they equate conservatives on YouTube and social media with the Islamic State. Yes, I kid you not. And they talk about what we can do to get rid of them. My favorite is when they mention that there are certain YouTube channels that have a bigger reach than daytime CNN. Oh, poor babies over at CNN. They don't like that their ratings are, even though their ratings have gone up, still doing worse than ours. Welcome to reality, you lunatics. I remember when Blockbuster Video went out of business. I'm sure Blockbuster lobbied in some way. Well, I shouldn't say that. But I'd imagine any major corporation facing its demise thrashes about violently in the death throes as it sinks and drowns in the water. Grasping at straws. Ban them. They're drowning us. Too bad, CNN. Well, if CNN has their way, if Twitter has their way, they will purge as many channels and as many individuals as possible from Twitter to YouTube. Here's the story from the Sarah Carter Show. CNN segment discusses removing conservative media and forcing everyone into the, quote, same conceptual reality. No, I got to stop for a second. There are benefits to a shared reality. No, hold on. What I mean is there was a time when we only had a few channels because the technology was in its infancy. Go back 100 years or so. Well, not even 100 years. I mean, when we had radio, right? It was much more difficult to disseminate information in this way. We had newspapers. Now, these outlets made their mistakes. These outlets had their lies, and there was yellow journalism, and there were serious problems. But everybody kind of agreed on what they were hearing and what they thought. Today, because of the internet, everyone can just choose to go wherever they want. It's actually a point brought up by this former Facebook official or executive. I don't know his exact position. His name is Alex Stamos. That because of social media, people can just choose to find a community and believe whatever they want. And there are problems there because people end up believing insane psychobabble on the left and the right. So I tell you, when you come to me and say, we got a problem with conspiracy theories, I'm going to tell you two things. For one, the censorship clearly isn't working. You ban all of these people. They're still out doing their thing, gaining a following, making money. You don't know what you are doing. All you do when you censor people is give up your ability to communicate with them, and they go find another way. Now, the second thing, if you're going to be censoring people, only censoring the side you don't like doesn't solve the problem. Jack, listen. You do not live in reality. You don't know what regular Americans are thinking. For that matter, you don't know what regular Canadians, Mexicans, or Ugandans are thinking. You are on leftist bubble Twitter, where you're seeing fringe opinions and probably just following the bottom line of your company. Because as long as the journalists won't write bad things about the left, these psychotic leftist conspiracy theories persist. They are now vetting the 25,000 National Guard being called into D.C., terrified that there's going to be an inside job. Are you kidding me? Wow. Going back to the 2000s, I remember when all of the media was basically unified in saying that truthers, you know what I'm talking about, were unhinged conspiracy theorists. Now you have the left terrified of a potential inside job from the National Guard, and I just roll my eyes. Okay, fine. If that's where we're at, let these people go on and scream Russia all day and night. Fine. But if you're going to censor people, can you at least keep it balanced? Here's the report. A segment on reliable sources featuring Brian Stelter and former executive Alex Stamos discussed turning down the capability of conservative media outlets by preventing AT&T, Comcast, and Verizon from bringing them into tens of millions of homes. The two lamented the influence of conservative outlets and personalities, especially since some have a larger audience than daytime CNN. Oh, I love it. The solution, according to these two, take outlets off television and social media platforms, but still allow people to seek the content if they really want to. Here's what we heard, quote, "We have to turn down the capability of these conservative influencers to reach these huge audiences. There are people on YouTube, for example, that have a larger audience than daytime CNN." Well, they go on to say there's YouTubers that have larger audience than daytime CNN who espouse crazy conspiracy nonsense. Well, I guess from their perspective, they could be talking about someone like me, but I don't spew crazy conspiracy nonsense. Now, I'll remind you all, the left will like to claim that I do. Why? Because I'll call them out and tell them they're wrong. And when I do, they say, that's a conspiracy theory. Okay, calm down. For instance, the fraud thing. Media Matters recently wrote a smear against my podcast, Timcast IRL, because we simply said that Donald Trump gave concrete examples of voter fraud. That's it. What does that mean? It means that Trump could have he could have made statements about fraud, or he could have said, here's an example of what fraud is. A concrete example. We did not say that Trump was right. We did not say that, Trump was the real winner or it was stolen. None of that, because we don't subscribe to that belief. But boy, do they want to come after us. Why? We get better ratings than CNN. Well, what can I say? And we really do. Most of the people who watch my videos are in the key demographic that CNN wants. Now, CNN's really improved their key demo audience. Daytime CNN in the gutter. Relative to my content, and I'll tell you, I've lowered the amount of content I've been producing quite a bit recently. I think things need to simmer down a little bit, and we're focusing a lot more on the Timcast IRL podcast. So if you want to support us, you can go to timcast.com, sign up to become a member, and we'll have more exclusive members-only content coming up soon. We just have one segment for now, as we're getting into the flow of things, but I digress. They don't like the competition, and that's the real issue here. And I think that's the real issue for Twitter as well. Take a look at this from Project Veritas. Twitter senior executive details plans for political censorship on a global scale. A lot of work that we've been doing over the last week is work that we've built on in other places. This is our global approach. Vijaya Gadde, Twitter legal policy, trust and safety lead. One of the interesting things, quote, this is a quote, is that a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last week is work that we've built on in other places around the world where we've seen violence unfold as a result of either misleading information or coded rhetoric. Could it be that the unhinged paranoia of the anti-police individuals on Facebook led to Black Lives Matter? I don't know if you've heard me tell the story before, but I'll explain it to you for those that aren't familiar. There was a period where police brutality videos were in the top 500 global websites. Like there's a website dedicated to nothing but police brutality. Why? It got traffic. You see, anger gets more shares than anything, and people calling for justice feels good. So on Facebook, you started seeing the rise of these videos. There's a really good rap song. I forgot the name of it, but it's actually really, really good. And it's complaining about police brutality. I think it's totally noble and legit. I think police brutality is a really bad thing, and I think we have to solve that problem. I don't think that cops are going around hunting people down and killing them. Okay? How did we get from complaining about police brutality and wanting accountability to claiming that police forces are going around hunting people? You see what happens when you have unhinged conspiracies and then Black Lives Matter goes around burning everything to the ground. So what about that violence as a result of misleading information and coded rhetoric, Vijaya? Yeah, I don't think you actually care. Now, they're trying to prop up authoritative voices across the board, which will probably result in some kind of simmering down. The problem is the young people who have already been swimming in the refuse are now working at these news organizations. And so the leftist insane conspiracies are becoming particularly prevalent in these news organizations. Let me start by saying, The Q stuff, the right-wing conspiracy, the pro-Trump, take out the cabal, it is absurd nonsense. They've been wrong every step of the way. Maybe there's some morsel of truth periodically in some of this stuff, but for the most part, it's just wrong. Now, I'll tell you what is true. A political party, the Democrats, are putting pressure on major corporations to excise their political rivals. Now, they're demanding that the 25,000 National Guardsmen in D.C. to guard the inauguration be vetted to make sure they're loyal. We also have the Secret Service being rotated to some degree, so they report, because they're concerned about whether or not the Secret Service will be loyal to Joe Biden. Loyalty tests for our soldiers. Interesting. The lucrative merger of corporation and state for the suppression of political ideology. I wonder what that is called. I think it's some kind of ism, I'd imagine. Maybe it starts with an F, if you know what I mean. The left is the one pushing all of this. The right, for the most part, is the one saying, stop. You do have fringe conspiracy kooky elements on the right, don't get me wrong. And I think a lot of these people have lost it. And no matter how much they're proven wrong, how many times it's proven to not be true, they won't let it go. And it's a bummer, man. I do know some flat earth people. Seriously. I know a dude, he went total flat earth. And I'm like, bro, what are you doing, man? Like, you can do these experiments yourself. You can climb a building and, like, measure shadows. That's how we did it the first time. We did it, I think, in, like, 3 BC. Was it Eratosthenes? I think he was the guy who actually accurately calculated the circumference of the Earth. What did he do? He, like, looked at obelisk shadows or something and measured the distance. Okay, it can be done. Anyway, I digress. On the left, you have this psychopathy, this derangement and paranoid delusion about Trump and fascism and white supremacists being everywhere, around every corner, and about deep conspiracy elements with Russia and foreign governments and China. And the media does nothing about it, and Twitter does nothing about it. So here we go. Gade says, we're actually going to be more aggressive in our enforcement beyond de-amplification. A lot of our learnings here have come from other markets. So in that sense, we do feel like it is. This is our global approach. You know what? I'm just sick of it. Just stop using Twitter. I'm gonna start posting less and less and less. I'm gonna make a goal of it. I know that I've said in the recently, I really don't use it as a business tool anymore. I've actually been just kind of trolling for the most part. I still do tweet things I think are important. I'm just going to, it's bad enough I post on YouTube as it is. So we're really trying to make a proprietary exclusive website at timcast.com. It's in its infancy. We just launched last week. And the goal is just to get more and more content on our own servers and under our own control outside of these algorithms. We need to build a core base of support and, essentially customers, as it were, audience members, so that we can actually start, making that our bread and butter. Once we do that, we can start talking about things that these platforms will ban us for. And so that's the plan. But I'm just looking at Twitter, and what they're trying to do is to take their fringe, psychopathic, deranged bubble world and then force it over everybody else. They believe insane things for insane reasons. They ban people for insane reasons. And then we see how this leaks out into corporate America. Twitter is a nightmare, and Jack Dorsey has gone insane. Now, that's an opinion. Let me clarify. I believe that Jack Dorsey was once a normal person. I believe he's from St. Louis. He seems like a nice guy. He understands some basic concepts, things like, Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and technology. He built the platform. He says, I believe it was him who said this, they discovered Twitter because a lot of the behaviors that emerged on Twitter, they incorporated, but they didn't invent. I would say it's more of an emergent phenomenon based around the system you created, the algorithms, and, essentially what you've built. But to say that you built something and someone found out how to use it is a discovery is wrong. You built the system. People started using it in certain ways, a methodology. You're still responsible. Well, I believe Jack was normal for a short period. But you see, on the left in these news organizations, they started tweeting and posting increasingly fervent, psychotic nonsense. Trump in Russia. And they believed it. And they all believed it. And in their bubble world, that's reality. Trump was a Russian asset. Look at how Rachel Maddow nearly cried when it came out it was not true. Most of us knew it wasn't true. You see how they were breaking down. But there's no elements of the right in the control of this tech infrastructure or news media. Now CNN. is aside from wanting to ban conservatives, they're constantly messaging major carriers to ban Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax. That's insane. You've gone insane. Oliver Darcy interviewed me a few years ago, and I was talking about the slippery slope of banning opinions you don't like. He interviewed me for Business Insider before he worked for CNN. Imagine that. A journalist who says, this prominent journalist is speaking out against censorship. Me. Here we are 4 years later since that interview. I believe it was about 4 years. And I'm still fighting for the exact same principle of defending free speech. And where's Oliver Darcy? Writing newsletters where he says he complained to major carriers, but they refused to comment on banning Fox News, OAN, and Newsmax. How did he go so far into this ideological zealotry? Because the left is swimming in a pool of their own refuse and they don't know. It's like you're the guy who controls the release valve for the sewage buildup, but everybody is covered in sewage and throwing sewage, so you assume it's normal. Meanwhile, conservatives are wearing suits looking at you and they're like, look at them. They look so weird and different. They're crazy. Why aren't they covered in sewage like us, says Jack Dorsey and Oliver Darcy. This is the reality of where things are going. They're already suspending politicians. In this story from The Hill, Twitter temporarily suspends Marjorie Taylor Greene over multiple policy violations. Well, what about Ocasio-Cortez? Okay. What about Nancy Pelosi when she repeatedly was posting about how rigged the election was and how it was illegitimate? That was fine. But now Twitter is going to get rid of those on the right who say the exact same thing because they are swimming in their own refuse. It reminds me of that Futurama episode where Fry's, it's a flashback, and it's called Jurassic Bark. It's where, he has a dog and the dog is swimming around in the pizza sauce, eating as it swims. And then Fry says he was like, he can do two things at once, three things. Because the joke is the dog took a dump I'm assuming, in the tomato sauce. That's what it reminds me of. Jack Dorsey and Vijay Gadde are swimming around in refuse, consuming it, and then regurgitating it. Because when you get these unhinged conspiracies on Twitter, unchecked, on the left, and people hear it and believe it, and then they say it to a journalist, and the journalist writes about it, and then Jack Dorsey sees that story and believes it's true, and then enforces rules based on the unhinged paranoid delusions of the left, the cycle continues. Meanwhile, right-wing individuals, I think, are being insulated from this because they're being kicked off these platforms. It's actually kind of helping the right be more grounded. Don't get me wrong. Those who got wrapped up in the conspiracies on the right with the Q stuff have pretty much gone off the deep end. Not everybody, but there's a lot of people I've talked to. I'm just like, bro, that's some crazy nonsense. Check this out. Drew Holden says, or actually, hold on. Jake Tapper of CNN. I wish I saw evidence that any of the people who pushed the big lie about the election had a conscience. Okay, Jake. Drew Holden says, what Trump and others have done re the election has been reprehensible, but it's revisionist history to pretend that CNN wasn't actively supporting previous liberal incarnations of election conspiracy theories. Here we have Stacey Abrams refuses to concede Georgia's governor race, hoping for a runoff. And to this day, they still say it was stolen. Hillary Clinton calls Trump illegitimate president. During an interview with CBS, former Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton talked about why she thinks Trump continues to mention her name. That's right. The left has been espousing this with no accountability. And now Jack Dorsey has gone insane. And you can look at Twitter stock value dropping like 17% in the past week. Hilarious. They've gone up quite a bit. I remember several years ago, Twitter was at like $17. And I had someone telling me like, dude, don't buy Twitter stock. Their user base is in decline. They did this thing where they had daily active users and they switched to monthly active users. Because here's my understanding. Or it could be the other way around. The general idea was, they want to maximize the appearance of people using the platform when it wasn't happening and people were leaving. Well, Trump got elected. Trump started tweeting. Twitter became a big thing and everyone jumped on Twitter and, there we go. If it wasn't for Trump, Twitter probably would have collapsed. But I guess because their bread and butter is made off of Twitter. And, Jack Dorsey and Vijay have always known that journalists are the key component of Twitter. I think 25% of all users on Twitter of blue checked users are journalists. That number may have changed in recent times, but, going back, because it makes sense. It's a powerful journalistic tool. But then you end up with these journalists like guzzling down these leftist conspiracy theories and then posting them. I mean, look at it this way. Think about how they used to call Sargon of Akkad alt-right or whatever. Like, the dude's whole shtick is anti-identitarianism. He goes on rants about identitarianism. Like, that's his, okay, I shouldn't say Carl doesn't go on rants. He gives eloquent arguments. Check out his new podcast, the Lotus Eaters podcast, but I digress. They were calling him alt-right. They were trying to get him banned. And the dudes, like, so the alt-right are white identitarians. Sargon, in opposition to all that, that's the depravity of the unhinged conspiratorial left that persists to this day. You have a video right now of protesters, Boogaloo protesters, at state capitol buildings. One of them's got a rainbow flag, and one's wearing a Black Lives Matter sweater, and they're like, white supremacists are descending on the Capitol. What? So I tweeted, are white supremacists now appropriating rainbow flags? And they're like, yes, they are. I'm like, no, maybe they're not white supremacists, dude. The woman wearing a Black Lives Matter hoodie? Remarkable. There's a video where these people, like the Boogaloo people, are arguing with other people who are telling them they're white supremacists who are there in DC. And they're like, no, we aren't. We have nothing to do with it. They're wearing like Hawaiian shirts. And they're like saying Black Lives Matter and they believe in civil liberties and civil rights and don't like the government. How amazing. You know, it may just be on purpose, though, I guess. I mean, there's the idea is Occupy Wall Street was a real threat. You had regular people of all walks of life and all political backgrounds outraged at the establishment and the banks. And then all of a sudden, identity politics popped in and basically chased everyone off. Aggressive, angry, I don't know, whatever you call them, like intersectional cultists took over. Conservatives didn't want to be there, neither did libertarians. And so it just became woke nonsense. Now you have people on the left arguing that in many ways, Oprah Winfrey is more oppressed than a white homeless veteran man. Well, he's a white male, though. He has inherent privileges. How insane is it that they have convinced the people of this country to unite against the poor white people? They're the bad guys. It used to be a leftist meme that they would convince you to blame the poor. There were comics where there's a like middle-class guy with like 3 cookies. There's a rich guy with a big plate of cookies, and the rich guy is pointing angrily across the table at a poor guy who has half a cookie. And then the middle-class guy is also looking at the poor guy. And I'm like, yes, that's correct. The only difference now is he's telling the white liberals in the city the problem is white people and blaming the poor white guy who lost his job because his factory shut down and went to Mexico. Identity politics really did shatter the working class of this country. And it's a shame, because if the populist left and right actually got their acts together and supported, say, like Brett Weinstein's unity candidacy, maybe they'd actually get rid of these crony corporatist, trash mongers like Joe Biden. That's why I was much more in favor of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's got a lot of problems. He was not perfect on war, but the Abraham Accords, these new peace agreements were great. I wanted more of that. Trying to withdraw our troops, I said, okay, I'll vote for that if he's going to do it. And so that banning critical race theory. But the left decided to back Biden. All right, well, here it goes. What we needed was some kind of ticket that includes just nothing about race and identity and any of the stuff. Just like we're gonna be here for the working class. That's about it. And then we'll negotiate and we'll figure something out. Instead, the left and the right agree on basically like almost everything, but hate each other on like cultural issues, as it always goes. It's going to be abortion. It's going to be, right now, trans rights and things like that. I don't know how we get past those issues because culture issues are easy wedge issues. But if the left and the right ever figured out that they agreed on hating the big corporations and the big banks, probably would make a big difference. But I guess it's a shame that the left was unwilling to support Donald Trump's, bull charge into the ivory tower and instead chose to elect the establishment crony corporatist of 47 years. It doesn't make sense to me. I get it. Trump's got problems, but I'll take that over the establishment. Well, censorship is coming and CNN is leading the charge. They've gone insane. Jack has gone insane. And all of these media outlets just think the right is insane. Let me just wrap it up with one final thought that you can take home. You can look this up. Oliver Darcy for Business Insider interviewed me. I defended the free speech of the alt-right, saying, yes, I don't like their opinions, but that's not what free speech is about. We must protect the right. Like, the only speech worth defending is the speech you don't like. Good speech that people all like doesn't need protecting. If we want to make sure that our speech is protected, that means we have to recognize that other people are allowed to say things we don't like. Oliver Darcy interviewed me, ran the story. Now today, he's leading the charge to get major cable channels removed from broadcast, from providers. How did he lose his mind so quickly? How did he become so radicalized? He's such an extremist now. An extremist. Listen, we can have an argument about how Fox News has got problems and OAN and Newsmax we can criticize. But it's extremism to be like, pull them off the air and demand providers do so. What radicalized Oliver Darcy? He's gone nuts. No joke. Why? Where'd you go, Oliver? What happened? I'm still in the exact same place I was several years ago. The big difference? I own guns now. That's new of this year. You can thank the riots. I've never been super anti-gun in any way, but that's the biggest change for me for the most part. I complained about Trump for years. I agreed to support him because of his second-term policy announcements and some of the things I liked, and I'm still critical of him. And we just did an IRL podcast episode last week where we ragged on him for like 45 minutes. I'm never going to be a Trump flag-waving MAGA hat guy, but there were things that he was doing that I preferred, and I definitely preferred him over the crony establishment. Oliver Darcy, however, takes the job at CNN and then just suckles the teat of corporate America and says what they want to say. Now he's trying to get his competition banned, and so is Brian Stelter. They've both gone nuts. I also like to remind everybody, it was actually Brian Stelter who was the first person to interview me after Occupy Wall Street. What happened to these people? Once championing independent media and activist voices and individuals rising up to challenge the machine, now working on behalf of the machine for CNN. I'll tell you what it was. The bottom line was threatened. And CNN was probably like, we're going to have to fire everybody. And they said, we'll propagandize everyone into believing the problem is our competition to save our sinking ship. Disgusting. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Stick around, and I will see you all then.